Let's take a walk through the brain. Imagine yourself in a time and a place where plants cover the land, fish fill the sea, and reptiles are the only creatures that you encounter. There are no computers, no light bulbs, no arrowheads even, but you do see a lizard. Not a particularly cute creature, and certainly not very intelligent. The lizard has a primitive brain that instinctually helps the animal to survive. Its whole life revolves around vital functions like blood pumping, breathing, eating, and reproducing. A part of the human brain is also lizard like. It is called the reptilian portion of our brains. It is a small almond shaped node at the base of your brain, and this lizard brain, is the primitive emotional center of your brain called the amygdala. It holds memory, emotional memory, which helps you react to your environment without the delay of thinking about it. So, one of the best examples is adolescence. And adolescence, in most cases at this point, goes from about 12, 13 until about 23, 24, 8 years old. And they've actually extended adolescence because of things like brain research. So what they did was they hooked up adults and adolescents and children to an EEG machine, and then they measured the electronic activity in the brain while people were being presented with images that were designed to incite emotion, fear, joy, um, and I can't remember what the other ones are right off the bat, but what they found was that adolescents, their neurons only fired in that neural mammalian area of the brain, whereas adults tended to have their neurons firing all over the place, but predominantly in the cortex and neocortex, where rational thinking occurs. So what happens is, and this is for anybody that's going into high school or middle school teaching, students have three reactions really. There's fight, flight, or freeze, and so all of this comes from that defense mechanism. And this is one of the reasons why never engage an adolescent. I mean, if the student refuses to do something, don't get all worried about, well, they'll never do things. There might be other issues going on. Don't engage them at that point. Pull them aside either after class or a little bit later. See if you can delve into a little bit deeper of why they didn't want to do whatever you asked them to do. But engaging them, as anybody who's on social media knows, never ends well. And you never will win that fight, because while you're talking, all they're hearing is want, 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 want. And I know this because when my daughter was an adolescent, when she was a teenager, she used to call me at work and just go on and on and on hysterical. She still does it sometimes. And one time, I just decided to test it. So I just started responding to her, want, in gibberish, like that. She never knew I was responding into gibberish. So you're wasting your energy if you're dealing with an adolescent because of that lizard brain phenomenon. The brain weighs only 3 pounds and consists of a lot of water. Our reptilian brain, or brainstem, connects to the spinal cord. The brainstem produces many of the chemical messaging and controls automatic vital functions, just as in the lizards. These functions ensure our survival, and we don't think much about it. It adjusts and maintains the heart rate, the blood pressure, and even breathing. It receives these messages through the spinal cord from all of our senses and reacts through a mechanism called the reticular activating system. The next part of our journey continues to take us through the unconsciously functioning portions of the brain. The cerebellum, which is located behind the brainstem, just above the very top of our neck, controls basic muscle movements and motor skills. The human cerebellum, like the brainstem, is not much different from that corresponding part of the animal brain. It helps us to walk, to grasp, or automatically remember how to perform other motor skills that we really don't need to think about. The main role of this section of the brain, as far as we know, is to help us acquire new skills. And once those skills are acquired, it makes them automatic. Think about riding a bike. As we travel further up in the brain from the brain stem and cerebellum, we move beyond the lower reptilian brain and we enter the next level of evolutionary brain development, the limbic brain. Sometimes this is also called the mammalian brain. Buried deep inside, it is the location of the limbic system and deals with things like eating, drinking, sleeping, hormones, and also it deals with the emotions. The final area of the ancestral development of our brain is the forebrain, which contains the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the neocortex, or the thinking part of the brain. This is still an unconscious part of how our brain operates. The hypothalamus, it plays a role in regulating things like the normal physical functioning, maybe like temperature, sleep, hunger, the fight or flight response. So what it does is it regulates that the reactions that come out of the reptilian brain. The amygdala and the hippocampus are also responsible for that fight or flight response. What it does is all of this works together to decide when we get stimulated or we receive stimuli. It decides if it's dangerous and should be sent to the thinking part of the brain for more processing. If it is dangerous, it may just go back in and have you to react. But as our brain is developed, that fight or flight response becomes more regulated by the thinking portion of the brain. Another thing that differs this from the lower part is that in some of this functioning, it is on a conscious level. When thinking through a problem, we know our brains are working. And a good example of this is that you've got the problem, you trying to solve the problem, and it kind of goes into the background and does it, but every once in a while your thoughts will kind of reflect on that. When we read a book, for example, or listen to someone, we're aware of the task and we're consciously putting effort towards those behaviors and actions, but it just kind of happens. So this is where this mammalian brain, it mingles with different functions from the higher thinking skills and the lower thinking skills. So finally we come to the thinking part of the brain, or the cortex. It is the upper part of the brain, and it is what strongly distinguishes us from animals. This is where our brain is responsible for higher level thinking, problem solving, planning, language, pattern recognition, meaning making, and so on. And this is conscious, although there are parts, there's still some kind of shady areas in that area, because we know that things like hypnosis have shown that we have access to all of those memories that are stored in there, but trying to get to those memories and that information can get challenging. So one would argue that some of the stuff in that brain is subconscious. We just, this is where we have trouble differentiating. And, the brain is a very complex organism, and we're still learning about it. At the end of the day, we don't know everything about the brain. We don't know everything that it can do. I have read articles that say that we only use 10% of what our brain is capable of. Others dispute that. So I think that as we learn more and more and more, it's very intriguing. And a couple of other things to note is that the brain has neuroplasticity. We used to think that neurons did not regenerate, and now we know that it is possible, at least in the brain, for neurons to regenerate. So, and there, we also know things like the brain. If one part of the brain gets damaged, another part of the brain will take over the functioning that area of the brain did. They've done some really cool things where, they've cut open a person's head at the top, and they could stimulate memories just by pushing, a little electric charge to that brain and bring up. People will actually smell things. and see things just by putting that little jar into the brain. So I just mentioned the neurons, but you might have noticed at some point that we have a billion or so brain cells, and we call these neurons. And these billions of neurons do not make the brain intelligent. It is when the neurons reach out their tentacles that look like tree branches and connect to other neurons and send chemical messages across. That's when that learning takes place.